Okay, hello everybody. My name is Kyle Turchik. I'm one of the co-founders of SGDA, and I have the honor of moderating our engineering panel today with our esteemed guests, Rochelle Davis, an engineer and game developer from Bonfire Studios, Reuben Brenner Adams, a game engineer at Originator, and Jim Dong, a lead UI engineer at Infinity Ward. Yeah, so the way this is going to go, I'm going to ask just a few pre-chosen questions for our guests, and then I'll have some questions from the Twitch chat. So if you guys have anything you want to ask our guests, just start typing in the chat. You can ask anything as long as it's related to our subject today, and as long as it doesn't ask our guests to break any NDAs. So yeah, that out of the way, I guess we'll start. Okay, so let's just go down and ask you guys to just talk about yourselves a little bit. If you could, would you please tell us what first made you interested in game development, and then just talk about your like how your career journey has been from like when you first got the initial spark to where you are now. Anyone can just jump in here, or I can just pick somebody.
You're gonna have to pick, Kyle.
All right, I'll pick. All right, let's start with Reuben.
All right, everyone. Happy to be here. Thanks, Kyle. My name is Reuben Brenner Adams, and I am a game engineer at Originator, which makes learning games for kids, primarily for iOS devices. And what got me interested in game development first was in university, I really got excited about the power of games for learning. And that has really driven my entire career. I've been doing games for learning for about 6 years professionally now. And all of the games that I love to work on and love to play teach me something, whether they are meant for education or not. So that's my story.
Cool, thanks. I'm gonna pick the next person. Let's go, Rochelle.
All right, it's me. Thanks for the intros, Kyle. I'm Rochelle Davis. I am an engineer and game developer at Bonfire Studios, which is a startup. And my title, I guess, is a little unconventional because I do a lot of things at Bonfire. I do write code, but I do a bunch of other things as well. We're a startup, which means we all wear a lot of hats, and I get to work on people stuff and production stuff and making an awesome game with 40 people. It's a good time. How I got into games is kind of unconventional, or at least I used to think so. I did not grow up coding. I did grow up playing games, but I actually grew up doing musical theater. So I am a performer at heart. I am still want to sing in the shower, at karaoke. I love musical theater, but I thought that I was going to do that as a career, and I had a bunch of twists and turns, and ultimately got to college deciding I wasn't going to do that. And it was an undergrad where I was trying to figure out what it was I was going to do if I wasn't going to perform. And that's when I decided I wanted to entertain, and I wanted to do it through movies. And I thought I was going to go work at Pixar. I was going to make movies at Pixar. So I decided I needed to learn to code, because if I wasn't going to perform for them and I wasn't going to create art for them, I needed to do something that they had a need for. And that's what I started learning to code. And I made a few more pivots. And ultimately, I did not ever work at Pixar or in movies, but I worked in games instead. And it's been an awesome time. I don't regret the change. And I am here to stay, to entertain people. So that's what I do here in games, and that's why I stay.
Awesome. Thanks, Rochelle. All right, and last but not least, Jim.
Thank you, Kyle. Thanks for having me here. So I'm Jin Dong. Right now I'm the lead UI engineer in Infinity Ward. Currently, I'm working closely with our UI team, including the UI art and UI design, and to implement our UI feature, and also for our in-house UI tools. And for me, I didn't start with the game programming at first. I started my undergrad degree just for the computer science, but at that time, I didn't feel like there's much passion about the programming itself. And then I realized programming for me was more like the tool. And the thing is you need to find the target you feel passionate about, where I think the video game is actually the things I want to use the programming as a tool, because I think the video game is a combination of art and the engineering. And also I still think there's a lot of undiscovered potential in the video games. So that's why I picked to focus on the game programming, and then I applied to the the game major in the University of Utah, and the internet arts and engineering. that's how I started my game major and focused on the game engineering. And then the beginning of this journey. Yeah, thank you.
So thank you, guys. Okay. So with that, we had a question that I wanted to ask, or start with Rochelle. You've been a longtime friend of students and the SGDA. I personally idolized you a lot when I was in college. But what advice do you have for students to excel when first starting their first game development or engineering job, or more importantly, maybe what should they not do? Yeah, you started out as an intern just like everybody else. What advice do you have for people?
Well, first, I'm very flattered. I didn't know that. That's very cool and awesome to hear. Thank you for sharing that with me. I think advice that I would give to really anybody at any level, but especially to newcomers to this, whether you're students or just switching into this industry, switching into tech, it's not all about the knowledge that you have about the code you're writing. And I think that that is surprising to some. And for me, that was actually, I didn't know it at the time, but that was what made me stand out when I was interviewing to become an intern. My first internship in games was at Sony, and then eventually I interned at Blizzard, and that's where I ended up working full time after school. And when I finally asked, like, what made me stand out? Why did you pick me? The answer was surprising. It wasn't because I had this deep knowledge of tech or that I had all the answers. I did decently in that area, and that was fine. I mean, you need to have those skills too. But what made me stand out was that I made eye contact with the interviewers, which, I mean, that's not a slam dunk. That's not going to get you a job every time, but that's a proxy for how you communicate with people. Matters a lot in this industry. It's an interdisciplinary industry. If you're making games, you're not just working with your computer. You're not just writing code. You're talking to people. You're learning about what they need. You're trying to understand what the player wants. You're trying to be a proxy and make things come to life. And that requires communication. So maybe a surprising answer, but that's the advice I would give, is focus on how you communicate and how you understand what other people are asking of you.
Anything to add, Reuben or Jim?
I mean, that was so well stated. I guess I would just add that as a student coming into the industry, I would say be open to learning new things. Sometimes the path that you think you are on or you think you want to have is not the one that is best for you. And so if you're open to new experiences and if you're open to learning different skills, you might find yourself in a different kind of career or in a different kind of place in your personal life than you thought you were.
That's really good advice.
And also I would add, like, the communication is also the key. And one lesson I learned from my, the game life, and is working in game industry is not just about the game. The first thing is about the people. And you have to make sure, you have the ability, you could just work with your teammate and think about it's like you work with a team. It's not just by yourself. So by that way, that means you need to have a good way to communicate, not just about to let people know what you are doing, and also let people know if you are blocked by anything. Don't just be afraid, say, oh, if I ask question and people, don't think that's a good way for them, a new game engineers. And so just don't be afraid of that. Always ask a question you don't know. But also keep in mind is also when you ask a question, and you could ask in the smart way. Like, for instance, don't just ask anything before you haven't done any research or investigation, but you just jump to the question itself. I would always suggest try your best and to figure out the things unless you do need the help, and then ask a question. In that way, when you get the answer, it's not just the answer itself. This process will help you in long terms when you especially face some new challenge or the problem you haven't been seeing in the past. Yeah.
But I'd rather see 10 questions from my intern rather than 0. Always.
It's very well stated. Reuben, your response actually leads into a question, segues really well into a question that we wanted to ask you. You've worn a lot of hats over the course of your career, and then you seem to found what you really enjoy doing, and you've had an interest in educational games. There's a lot of specialties in the field of engineering, and there's a lot of different genres of games. What advice do you have for someone who's still trying to discover their niche and what they enjoy working on?
I don't know that I can speak to everybody, but in my experience, I just tried to explore as many different possibilities as I could. And I did that a lot through game jams. I participated in a bunch of game jams as a university student and then in the first couple of years of my career. And I sort of grew into various roles through that process. I thought at one point that I wanted to be a game engine programmer. I found out I really didn't. And it's much better to find that out in a week-long game jam than it would be to try to get a job as a game engineer and then find out that I really didn't like that. So that's one way that I've chosen to sort of explore different possibilities. And then also, I think another thing is any industry events that you can go to, whether at this point they're virtual or in person, just be curious and ask people about what they're interested in. Don't necessarily only go with the thought that you're going to get a job. Just go with the thought that you're going to learn something and that you're going to meet some interesting people, because those people are going to be your peers in a few years. And it will be great to know them in addition to just the knowledge that you'll gain from them.
I would plus what Reuben is saying here with just trying a bunch of different things and being open to learning new things, and also underscoring if you can figure out what you don't want early, that's really a great boon for you. My version of that was I took a graphics class in undergrad. Again, I wanted to do the whole work at Pixar, make animated films. I would assume that I would need to really dig into graphics to be able to do that well. And man, that was just not for me. Figuring out why that one pixel was not the right color, I did not find joy in that. And then that took something off the list, which was kind of freeing, because if it's something that you don't like, then you can sort of look where else there is to go help. And for me, on my first full-time job, I was working on the Hearthstone team, which was very small. Not everybody has the opportunity to work at a really small team or at a startup even. In this case, this was not a startup, but a very small team within Blizzard. And it meant that I got exposed to a lot of things, which helped me learn what I liked, what I didn't like, but I had to move around a lot. And I probably would have tried to choose that if I could, but it was a really great forcing function to just kind of go everywhere in the code base. And that helped me figure out this is what I like and this is what I don't like, but ultimately I want to help. Ultimately, my value set is I want to make the team better. And so if I can make the team better, it kind of doesn't matter what code I'm writing. And that was useful for me to know about me as well. Sometimes it's the code that makes you tick, get up in the morning and want to write that particular type of code. Sometimes it's something about you personally. And in my case, I just want to be the glue between all the pieces. So I'll write whatever code that's needed, as long as it's not graphics code.
And go ahead.
Oh yeah, I mean one suggestion also I'd like to add here is also another good way to think about in what way you want to make the change to the game. For instance, graphic could be one way, it's a virtual language, and you really want to change the game in that way, you could focus on the graphic part. But if you focus on, say, I want to make the game is like the AI, that's a way I want to change, apply my idea into the game. That's a way maybe you say, oh, this is a direction I really want to push forward. So maybe that's another way to help you to say which area you really want to spend years and to explore. And yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. And Jim, sort of on that note, I know you've taken a lot of courses in UI UX design, even though you're a UI engineer. And you said that game development you think is a combination of art and of engineering. Mm-hmm. What advice would you have for someone who's not sure if they want to be an engineer or designer yet? And how do you think that understanding the design side helps you as an engineer?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think the first thing is if we just talk about the two roles, like the game designer and the game engineer, I would suggest no matter which role and you would want to go with, learning the programming is always the key. Just like I said, the programming I consider is like the tool, and the tool will help you to achieve your idea and to apply your the design into the real product. And also I think by learning say the programming, that's also will help you set up your mindset to understand how game actually works. So after with that knowledge, and then even say you want to be like a designer, and you have a better understanding about with our current, like the tool, the engine, with all the limitation, how I can still achieve my ideas. That would be super helpful versus like if you don't have much knowledge about programming, but still say, oh, I have a great idea, let's get this done. But then you find out there's one limitation there and there is another, and you couldn't just achieve what you want. So I think that's a suggestion and from myself. And for the roles between the engineer and the designer, I will always consider them it's easy you could switch between roles to roles once you know how to do the programming. Like for instance, I talk to our team is about the key about between the engineer and the designer is if they could use the same language. When I talk about the language, it's engineering, they have some particular words, professional words about engineering. While designer, they will have their mindset and to talk about some design. Use the same language would help people to keep them on the same page. And also we could, by having the communication like that, in that way, the engineer and the designer, they could work closely to work out the problem, to implement the new feature, to just achieve the new ideas into the product. So in general, I think there's no like a hard line between engineer and the designer, but always the foundation is how to do the programming. Yeah.
Very well said. Anyone else have anything to add?
What Jim said.
Right. Well, good job, Jim. All right. Okay, here's the juicy question that everybody always is waiting to ask. Okay, I think you guys know what it is. So what are your thoughts on crunch and maintaining a healthy work-life balance? Because crunch is somewhat inevitable in a lot of places in our industry. And I think that's the thing that probably students are warned about the most before going into pursuing a career in this. So what do you guys think about it? How would you maintain a healthy balance?
Jim, you want to start this one?
All right. Yeah. Okay. I think I'm kind of like expertise in crunch, but I think the crunch first in general, crunch is not good. And the crunch, but normally it's like something we cannot work around. And when you want to ship a game. And so my suggestion first is you need to eat well and sleep well. It sounds like kind of like pretty simple, even some kind of stupid, but when people actually doing the crunch and people might focus on the work, they try to save the time. Sometimes people might not pay much attention about the food they have and how the status of their sleep they realize they have. And I would say it's like always make sure like during the crunch time and people still need to make sure you have good food and make sure you have good sleep. And also another thing is about the mental health. In particularly, like say, every day when you finish your crunch, and I know like people still want to spend some time, like the personal time. That's basically your brain is telling people, people need some time, stay away from the work. In that way, that will make you feel kind of secure. But think about the worst case is already you finish your work in like really late. If you spend some time as your personal time, which means you have less sleep. So in that way, it's like actually eventually it wouldn't contribute to anything good and to your crunch time. Instead, like you have less and less sleep. So in that way, I would mean it's always make sure you have the sleep, even you might feel, oh, I still want to have my personal time after the work, but in this way, you couldn't. But when you can have the personal time, it's like doing the weekend and try to just stay away from your work and try to stay away from anything related to the game and explore something outside of the work and to change your mindset. I find out it's like that's that really good way to recharge your brain and make sure when you come back next week, you'll be ready for the new work.
Photography, right, Jim?
Yeah.
The photography.
Yeah. That's one way I spend. Yeah. My time after work. Yeah.
I was sharing with these fine folks that I have lots of feelings about crunch, so I'll try to keep this as brief as possible. It's not going to be brief. I can just feel it in my heart and soul right now. It's not going to be brief. I've been very fortunate myself. I've been doing this for close to 15 years, and crunch is not a thing that is culturally baked into any of the teams I have been on. And it's a team culture choice. I mean, you have to start with the leadership values of that's not how we want to have our people approach this game. That doesn't mean I haven't worked late hours or I haven't worked overtime. And if I do, I then take time off afterwards. When you have a live game, and I guess this is one of the pillars in my mind, most games right now are live services, especially multiplayer ones. There is no finish line. Games are marathons, not sprints if you're building them. So the idea of crunching is kind of a fallacy and a flawed one because you're never going to be done. You can always do more. And on Hearthstone, we used to talk about there's always going to be another patch. There's always going to be something else coming out. And we were very judicious about delaying whatever non-critical bugs we could delay so that we could not burn ourselves out. Again, that doesn't mean that was always the case. Sometimes there were live issues that were taking the services down and we had to work overtime. But as a cultural choice, crunching was not an option. At Bonfire, the way we talk about it is sustainably innovative. That's what we want to be. And we are making something creative in games, all of us. Even if you're writing code, it's still creative. You can't be innovative and break boundaries and do something new if it's not sustainable. You'll get burnt out. And you'll have to figure out how to recharge from your work and how to, make it back to the next Monday willing to go to work again. And what you want to be doing, I have another friend in games who says this to me all the time, you want to be looking forward to Monday, not looking forward to Friday. And if you're crunching and you're burning out, you're not looking forward to Monday at all. You're desperate for Friday to arrive so that you can go do the things that actually bring you joy. So for me, work-life balance is not just when you're crunching, it's all the time. It's the marathon, not a sprint. It's being sustainably innovative. It's integrating your life into your work and vice versa in a way that's healthy for you. And sometimes that means doing something that's not working. For me, that's reading books or watching TV or going on hikes or hanging out with my kids. Like there's all sorts of things that I do that aren't work, but my kids, my family, my life is just as much a part of my work too. And all my coworkers know about all those things about me too, because they aren't separate. They are balanced though. And we have a large culture of go take a break. We can see you starting to look forward to those Fridays. It's time to start looking forward to the Mondays again. I will stop there. I could say more, but try not to crunch. If you're leading a team, if you're on a team, try to look for the teams that believe it's not a good idea and fight against it.
That's great.
A couple of small things to add. I am of the firm belief that crunch is never the answer. It's never essential to ship a game. That belief is not always held by everybody in the industry. Some people believe that it's mandatory and it's necessary. But I don't really buy it. And I've worked on some games that were very ambitious in very short timeframes and without crunching, and we were able to do it. I think something else that I would add is to examine yourself and know your limits, because it's not always the same to crunch. It's not always the same to work a 12-hour day. There are days that I am productive for 12 hours. There are days that if I work an extra 4 hours at the end of my day, I will get nothing else done. So if you can think about like where you're being productive and what you're actually contributing to the project, I think you can sort of self-regulate a little bit better. And that's not going to help if your manager is demanding that you that you stay in the office until 9 p.m., let's say. But it might help if there's just one more feature that you need to get in and it can't wait till Monday or it can't wait till tomorrow. So just think about that and think about the way you're treating yourself.
I love that. I will +5 self-awareness. And also in the last few years with, the state of the universe and the pandemic, that's become even more important. Yeah. You're not every day of the week is not the same level of productivity or energy. And knowing that about yourself is super powerful. Thank you for sharing that, Reuben.
Yeah, thank you all. I actually have a little bit to add too, from the perspective of like students who are still not sure if they want to pursue a career in game development or not. But make sure that making games is fun, right? So if you end up crunching, make sure that you're still enjoying making games. I think the reason that crunch is so systemic in our industry is because everybody's really passionate about it and everybody always wants to do more and they always want to do the best that they can do. Sometimes the best that you can do takes longer than like just you can't just crunch it out sometimes. But yeah, so if you find yourself that you're crunching and it's not fun anymore, or like you're staying not out of passion, but because you're just forced to from some mandate that says this feature needs to be in, try and find a place that you like working and a game that you like working on and a field of engineering that you like working in.
And Kyle, as someone who's been a game designer and a programmer, there are a lot of ways to avoid crunch. There's pushing deadlines, and that is sometimes difficult or costly. There's cutting features, which is sometimes heartbreaking and can be difficult for everybody. But I think every team can have a different solution to crunch based on who's on it, what game they're working on, and what their processes are. So it's not just about finding. I think what you were saying about finding the right team and finding the right solution for you is very valid.
Thanks, Reuben. Yeah, I think it's important to find, or it's important to kind of combat the crunch as a team, because if you see everybody else on your team working so hard, it kind of, you might feel like, oh, I need to do more because the rest of my team is doing more. But then you all together need to step back and just say like, okay, this is what we can do in the time that we have without killing ourselves.
No sympathy crunch. I don't know if that's where you're going with that, Kyle, but we used to call it that on Team 5. A sympathy crunch meant that just because someone else was trying to get something done for whatever reasons were deemed to be good reasons, that didn't mean the rest of the team stayed. Everybody else went home, recharged, and then came back.
Yep.
Because you don't need to be there just because somebody else is working hard and you feel like you have to work with them. Like, that's not productive.
Yep, that's what I was saying. Just because the rest of your team is doing it doesn't mean that you have to. You can, and you should tell your rest of your teammates too if you see them working too hard to just, we'll work through it together. Okay, that's enough about the crunch. Okay. Here's another fun question. Without breaking any NDAs, are there any experiences where you wish that you or your team had done something differently? Maybe some time you made a mistake, you just wish that you had done something differently.
I can go first on this one. It might seem really simple, but way back in my younger years, one of my maybe biggest mistakes that didn't feel like a huge mistake at the time was not taking care of all of the edge cases. I remember writing a comment in one of my pieces of code. This was on Hearthstone, and I said, "We should never get here." That was the comment. And that is a fallacy. I've said that twice now about fallacies in this conversation. We definitely got there. When hopefully you're making a game that a lot of people want to play. Hearthstone was fortunate to have that problem. We had a lot of people excited about it. We still do. And even if it's a 1% or less than 1%, when you've got the concurrency that a game like Hearthstone has, that's still a lot of people. If you find yourself writing a comment like that, at least make it a log. At least give yourself breadcrumbs to figure out what the heck is going on, and assume that there will always be some sort of esoteric issue. Every edge case will probably be hit. So advice, handle your edge cases.
I think that's really good advice. And I want to offer a counterpoint that doesn't go against it at all, but is just sort of a different way of thinking about it. I think some of the early projects that I worked on as a student and also in my early professional career, we shipped too late. We took too much time to polish every single thing. And we didn't get the value out of that polish that we put into it, or the cost that went into it. And so I think if you have something that works and meets the standards of the team and the company, even if it is not the perfect thing that you would absolutely want, ship it. If you have a hit as big as Hearthstone, you can deal with the fact that you have players hitting these edge cases. And so definitely handle your edge cases, but also don't be afraid to ship something before it is 100% technically and artistically the best it could be.
Okay, and for myself, like if I could make the change back in time, I think one thing I would like to make my keyword is the documentation. And the reason for that is like, I believe like everyone here who ships the game has experiences, like everyone were really busy when we ship the game. We just made the choice and we implement the features, but there was no like documentation. In this case, documentation is not about how we do certain things. It's more about why we make certain things. Like by having the documentation like that, it would be pretty helpful if we get back, let's say when we do the postmortem, we will understand at one point why we make such a choice and why, the reason behind the decision, which could be super helpful for our next project. But also if we have some question about our certain design, that would be also helpful if we just like revisit all this documentation that will help us to remember like why we made such a decision. But unluckily, like because everyone was so busy with their current work, in this case, it's like a short-term goals, and people didn't pay much attention and spend the time on documentation, which after 2 or 3 years, and then people realize, I really wish I could make some documentation at that point. So that's the things I wish I could make the change.
I think that's true on every team.
Probably. That's another thing, actually. It's like it's important to take that time to document what you've done in the past instead of just keep moving forward. Sometimes you just need to take the time to do that. Let's see. Oh, so Rochelle was talking about this, how most games now are live services. How do you think, and then also a lot of people are working from home nowadays just because of circumstances. But how do you think the industry's changed in the last 5 years? Like, what have been the biggest changes, and what do you think might happen in the future?
I think I've seen in the last several years, I feel like employees in this industry, those of us that love making games, we have a lot of choice. There are a lot of studios that have started up in my area, certainly, and definitely elsewhere. There's a lot of like funding going into games. It turns out games are a really big source of entertainment and joy for across the globe. So that means that there's a lot of companies, a lot of places passionate about doing this. You have a lot of choice as a person going into this industry, which means you have the freedom to find what works for you. And I don't know that that wasn't true before, but I feel like it's just kind of force multiplied now, where you can find that team that Kyle was talking about that is making the game that you are excited about with the team that you're excited about in the way that you're excited about. And there's a bunch of different flavors of game development, I guess, if you will, that you can choose from if you just go look. That is probably going to continue to be true going forward. I mean, one of those aspects is like where you work, literally where you're sitting when you work. That wasn't true, I think, a few years ago, that most of the time you could get a remote position. And that's not true everywhere still, but that's way more true now than it used to be. And that's a source of freedom. Size of team, size of company, type of game, like all of those choices are a lot more full. You have a lot more options, which I think is cool. And I do think that live services are the way of things now. Your game is going to be live, hopefully for a long time, in most cases. And so that changes how you approach making it. It changes what tools you build and how you think about the content you're going to put in. It changes the staging and the phasing of when you release things. And that's part of the development process now, and has been for some time, but that's like deeply rooted now, I believe, in the games that I'm seeing come out and the games that I've certainly been working on.
Yeah, I think the game as a service is one of the phenomenal things in the last 5 years. And from my personal perspective, I think that's also the solutions from the game industry to solve the problem is right now for making the game, the cost of making the game is actually keep increasing. When I talk about the cost here is think about before, because we have so many the hardware limitation. So the way we achieve the ideas, like for instance, back in like say 8 pixels at that time, you can just do the art programming just by one person. Because of all the limitations, you don't spend much time from the idea level into the product level. But right now, like say for making the game, especially like the AAA game, like the product, if you want to from the idea level to the product level, you have to go through so many different layers, like with the technical implementation and the pipeline and all this stuff. that causes like the cost of the, the product in general is just keep increasing. So with game as a service, that will make sure like all the, like say the resources the development team spend in this product, you will keep just not just say 1 or 2 years and people have abandoned that. It's like as long as we support this game and you will keep growing. And so I think that's another reason, like say we will see more game as a service in like say the recent years.
I think I have a slightly different take on the future. It's less about games and more about the industry. I really hope and believe that our industry is going to keep moving forward in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, all of those areas. I think some studios are moving toward unionization, and that can be really helpful for some studios. But I think just in general, the industry is getting more friendly and easier to get into and easier to work in. And I hope and believe that will continue in the next 5 to 10 years and beyond.
That's a great way to end it, Reuben. Thanks.
I think that's why we're here. Yeah.
Huh?
That's why we're here.
Yes, that's why we're here. Yeah, I've seen that too, and I hope that trend continues. So we're about halfway through the panel now. I just wanted to remind everybody that in a little bit we're going to start taking questions from the Twitch chat. So if you want to put your questions in there, just start doing that, and I'll pick some in a little bit. Let's see. So we were talking about teamwork a lot. I think that's an ongoing theme because it's so important in the game development industry. But what do you think, besides just technical skills, are some of the skills that you value most in yourself as a teammate and in your other teammates?
I feel like I've gone first just about every time, so I'm keeping my mouth closed on purpose. Someone else start.
There were a lot of comments earlier about communication, and that is a huge theme, and we could go on and on about that. So I'll say something different. I think honesty and the ability to give critical feedback that isn't hurtful is something that I value in myself and my team very highly. I think if you can give and receive critical feedback without getting your feelings hurt or without hurting others' feelings, I think that is a big piece of communication in the industry that is very valuable for any team, because if you just go with the first idea that comes off the drawing board, it's not always going to be the one that's best for the game or the team or the project. And giving that feedback without alienating anyone or isolating anyone is just crucial to the process, in my experience.
I totally agree with that, because it's like, I think everyone's goal here is how to make a better game, right? It's not about like, if we give some critics and that might hurt people feeling, that's not about that. As long as like everyone will be on the, the same version to make the better game, I think like everyone will be, just keep moving forward and to get that goal. And also I think another thing about like say I will value my team here is like always be like an active player. Like here, when I call active player is if you see something like say the issue in the game, even it's not responsibility to take care of that, you can still call out to the team, say, is anyone taking care of this issue? And also, for instance, if you have like attacks on you and you have not enough information, if you have the ability, you could explore with other teammates to gather some information. Sometimes like that will even require people to be your own producers in this case. But I think that's not the wrong thing, because think about like right now we are just talking about being like an engineer, but what if in next 5 or 10 years, you will be like a senior guys and the lead and even the, the director, you will deal with all these things in that case. And in that position, there is no one who would teach you, say, here is a plan, here is a task, and you just follow that and complete the work. But if you're like an active player, you always know this is a problem. If we don't have solution, let's figure out like a new solution, jump on it. I think that is like, I would value it as the most important ability. like in my team.
Yeah, I agree with what's been said by both Reuben and Jim. I think I would add on top of communication and wanting to learn, I would put in with their growth mindset is really important. Humility is part of that too, understanding what you know and what you don't. Initiative, but tapered with humility. So wanting to jump in and make changes and do awesome things, but knowing that your idea is not the only one and possibly not the best idea. So approaching initiative with humility. I think that we talk a lot about trust and transparency on my team, and I approach the other people I work with the default assumption that I trust them and that they're awesome. And I feel the same reciprocated, and that's huge. If somebody just automatically defaults to trust, like your ceiling is so much higher, and vice versa when your team lets you fly, right? If they believe that you can. So I think it comes back to the teamwork stuff. Those are the skills that I value the most. It's also great if you can make awesome things, but I'd rather you be a great human first.
Thanks, everybody. Okay, I'll start taking some questions either from the Twitch chat or the Discord, if you guys put questions in the Discord. So yeah, just remember, here's a good question. Okay, here's a question right now. I want to join game jams, but I get anxious because I don't have the technical or artistic skills to be useful. Any advice?
Nobody has technical or artistic skills to be useful on every part of the process. And so I think the idea of a game jam is that you're doing it in a really low stakes environment. If you love your game jam project, of course you can work on it for a year or 2 or 4 until you release it. But what you can do is work on it for 24 or 48 hours and then decide that you never want to look at any of that code or art or sound again, or writing or whatever you're doing on the process. And so I think that's why it's such a good place to try things out. One is that it's low stakes. And then 2 is that the people around you, in my experience at least, are going to be really understanding of you taking a risk and are not going to react as negatively to a bad outcome as they might on a professional project that has serious financial stakes or time stakes or things like that. So I think it's just about, it may be outside of your comfort zone, and it may be learning skills that you don't have, but I would encourage you to take that leap if you're comfortable doing so, and jumping into a new discipline. Even I personally have done a lot of sound design at game jams, and I started doing that in about 2015. And by the time I started my professional career, I was able to do sound design for the small mobile game that I was working on, and nobody else on the team really had that skill set. So it was just through trying it out at a game jam one time and deciding I didn't want to be a programmer every single game jam I went to that I was able to do that. So I would encourage you to do the same if you can.
I can agree more, Reuben. Like I really like the word you use, a comfort zone. I think one of the things for global, like for the game jam in general, is like stay out of the comfort zone. Like because like if you are like the one of the engineers of the game company, normally you wouldn't have many chance can take the risks, because you would think about you need to ship the game. You couldn't just say face with a failure. But in the game jam, it's okay if that is come up with something that outcome is kind of like like say ideal, that's totally okay. Or even, I mean, for me, it's even the frustration is one part of the game jam, the meaning of the game jam. You need to like say experience that, because like there must be some failure you have to like say go through first until you reach to the point and you will be like say finally you could achieve like say your idea, no matter from the game jam or from the work. And for me, it's like the first couple of the game jams, I always find the frustration, but I've managed the way to go through that, and also trying to learn from that and see how I can do better, no matter for the next game jam or just to my game engineering work.
Just to add again, sorry, two more pieces of advice regarding game jams, in addition to what Jim said, which is great. Do short game jams. Don't do month-long game jams to start out with. And do game jams that are unranked and unrated. Don't, I mean, you can, if you want to, enter game jams where there's a winner, but if there's no winner, there's even less stake.
Awesome. Okay. Anything to add, Rochelle?
Oh, this was great. I'm learning from you guys.
Great. Okay, we've got another good question. How does working on a big engineering team differ from the smaller teams that students might be used to?
I think for me, most of my teams have been smaller, and that's because I realized when the team got much bigger, how much I didn't enjoy that. So I'm thinking about that time when the team was the biggest. I think the biggest I was ever on was when I was on Hearthstone, and it was close to 80 or 90 people, which was very different from the 12 that I had joined the team on. It was definitely true that there was more specialization at that size. So that's the first thing that I would say. On a very small team, you would wear a lot of hats, you do a lot of things, you jump in a lot of places out of necessity. On a larger team, typically there's going to be more structure. Part of that is because there's just a need to have communication lines. Like, how do you get information from one group to the other? How do you get the left hand and the right hand to know what each other is doing and work together on something that requires some sort of sometimes hierarchy, structure, something else? So that's more true on larger teams. Sometimes on a larger team, they're working on entirely different things, like leapfrogging on patches or leapfrogging on content. So you may be working with the same group of people and an entirely different group of people is working on the patch after you or the feature after you. That's not always true, but that comes back to how what is the team trying to achieve and how fast they're trying to achieve it. I think also the bigger the team got, and one of the reasons that I prefer a smaller team, the less I knew everybody. That's not everybody's thing. Not everybody needs to know everybody. I'm not saying that's required, but I liked that about a small team. I like literally knowing everyone's birthday and being able to talk to them about what their cat's name is. That's fun for me. The bigger your team gets, the harder that is. So it's harder to know the stories behind everybody, what makes them tick, which can make it harder to have that shortcut to just get things done quickly. But it's a different kind of challenge. You have to work through that a different way.
And also working in a really a big engineering team could be really changeable. And I think the communication is of course the first thing. But I like to talk about another part is how we could make sure everyone would understand or know what everyone is doing. Rachel just mentioned, if I even never meet this person and in my whole life, and then how I could just work with a feature with that guy. And also I noticed in a big team, sometimes it will be an issue when we work on certain, say the bugs or the features. It's kind of hard to tell the people's responsibility. So that's why as said, active player would be in this case, we help the team because they wouldn't care, say, oh, if this is just about UI or it's actually about the gameplay system, people would jump on that and to figure out, say, okay, this is outside of UI, but I also want to take this feature because it's has a connection with our UI system. And so in that way, that would definitely help to, make sure even the size of the team keeping bigger and we can still figure out an efficient way. Otherwise, we would just end up with, I don't want to use the word the fight, but it's the drama is people just talk about, you should take this feature because it's not under our responsibility. And in that way, it's kind of waste of the time for all the communication like that. That's, I assume that would be all the, say the each big engineering team would face with when we have around over 15 people in general.
I guess one more thing to add on that you reminded me of, Jim, is that the bigger the team is, the more critical it is that your code is super, super clean, because typically that's what does all the talking. If Jim and I are working on the same team and it's a lot of people, I have to be able to understand what he thought simply by reading his code. Maybe I don't even know there's documentation attached to it. I just need to figure out what I'm going to change and what I'm going to break just by reading the code. And that can mean more testing, that can mean more automation to try and solve that problem, to keep me from doing something dumb. But you as an engineer have a greater responsibility almost on a big team to make sure your stuff is rock solid. I wouldn't say that you have no responsibility to do that on a small team, but it's a lot easier to figure out what's going on and to be able to reach directly out to the person who wrote whatever thing when the team is smaller, because you probably know who that is. And on a large team, you may not ever know who wrote that code.
That's a great point.
Yeah. Some big teams nowadays, there's international teams too with time zone differences, and you can't even talk to those people because they're on such a different time zone. So you have to, that's where the documentation comes back in, or just making sure that your code like speaks for itself.
And Jim said this earlier too, but crafting your questions well in a larger or an international communication situation, you need to be able to figure out how to do that. The onus is on you to make sure you have the information up front. So like if I'm sending a note to a partner that I'm working with across the globe, which we have those, and I need to make sure that I'm asking the right question because they're going to read it while I'm sleeping, I need to have all the information up front and say, hey, like this is what I'm running into. This is the thing I'm trying to solve. Here's like screenshots. Here's my code. All of that stuff happens asynchronously. And that happens even on a large team when you're all in the same time zone too. Absolutely.
One thing I'd like to add to that is right now, because of work from home, I even notice people will record like a video just by room and say, this is the question, here is the code, this is how I debug it, and send the video out instead of just typing the words, which I find is pretty like helpful in this case. Yeah.
Thanks. So here's another very common question. Just like interview prep, like what would you recommend to people to prepare for their first interview? And how did you get your first job in the industry? And what do you think set you apart?
I like to take this one. So
Sure.
I think the interview first is like, don't be afraid, like especially for your first interview. And normally you wouldn't expect you would do something great because if you don't know what would be the typical question and from the game company, and it's really hard, you have the idea, say how to prepare for that. So my suggestion is like, while you get prepared for the interview, but also try to have as many interviews as possible. So in that way, you will get more experience and you will be more chill instead of feeling nervous when you have your next interview. And the second thing is it's always good to find a way to make the showcase for yourself. Like for instance, you could do the things like people ask you a question, you just answer. But you could find also a good way. For instance, say, if people say, what's your experience, for instance, about UI? You will say, oh, I have experience with UI for over 2 years. And recently I'm particularly working on like a UI system, blah, 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 for that. And then you will bring the conversation to like, oh, tell me about this UI system you work on. So in that way, you will find this is the thing I really want to show. And, during the interview, and instead of just answer the question, that's it. Like I have 2 years experience in UI and done. And then you just wait for the next question. And in that way, you couldn't guarantee by like answering all these questions, you could have a really good chance to show yourself. But if you be more like, say, be smart about when you answer some question and also, put the things you really want to show and to like the HR in this case, I think that would definitely help you into this process.
I think I'd add, just as a baseline, interviews are stressful. They're always stressful. They're stressful when you've been doing this for a long time too. Like if you go interview somewhere and you should have all the answers, you feel like you should have all the answers, it's still going to be stressful. And also you should never have all the answers because you should always be learning. But if you approach it as a conversation as much as possible, I think you're in a better mind space and headspace to like actually show what you're capable of. So to prep for that, I would say practice answering questions with how you're thinking. It's less important to me when I'm interviewing someone that they have the right answer. I want to know their thought process. How did they get there? That's true for like team-based questions, and that's also true for technical questions. How do you think? Because on a day-to-day basis, you don't have the Rolodex or like the whatever Stack Overflow answer in your head all the time. It's how do you approach it? What do you think about and how do you get there? How do you solve a problem? That's it's got longer legs. That's the growth mindset thing. If you can do that, and I can see that in an interview, that's useful. I think also don't forget that you're interviewing them too. So make sure that you prepare your questions about their company, this team. Why would you be a good fit? Why wouldn't you be a good fit? What are they worried about with you? What are they excited about with you? And ask those questions. You have every right to. And hopefully they're excited that you're like asking them, because it is a dialogue. It's a two-way. Do I fit for you? And do you fit for me? And then finally, and maybe this sounds silly, but there's this thing called power posing. And you can do this, especially when you are virtual, because no one can see you before you turn your camera on. Power posing is just standing up straight, legs like hip width distance apart, hands on your hips, and just basically making yourself big. It literally changes the hormonal chemistry in your body, and it makes you feel a little bit more confident. Everybody's stressed out in interviews. So if you give yourself the benefit of the doubt and like give a kickstart to your adrenaline hormones and all the other things that make you feel a little bit more confident, it can make a difference to how you show up.
Thanks. Reuben, do you have anything? Yeah.
These are both such great answers. Just calling back to something Rochelle said earlier, practice your soft skills. The technical skills need to be there, of course, as well. But what makes you stand out is not giving perfect answers to every single question. It's how you can come across to the interviewer. I'm much more likely to want to hire somebody who gives me some unusual thing about them that I can latch on to. And I'm much more likely to remember them too. So that doesn't have to be anything in particular, but if you can, make eye contact, if you can smile, if you can show that you're comfortable in the room and you feel like you deserve to be there, which you do, that goes a long way.
Awesome answers from everybody. Yeah, I think I just add just be yourself, because it's a two-way, just a conversation. And the people interviewing you are looking for somebody that they want to work with for a really long time, every day, and so they they want to like you. So just be yourself and don't worry about if you don't know the answers. Just be natural, and I think that comes across. I think that's something that Rochelle also said earlier. Making eye contact with your interviewer, that simple things like that can be important. So our time's almost up, unfortunately. So before we go, I just like to ask a very open-ended question to everybody. If you have just any other general advice that you want to give some students that are just looking to find their place in the game development industry, specifically like in engineering.
I'd say don't be afraid to reach out to engineers that are in the field. We're not that scary. We love to talk to students and we love to give advice. That's why we're here, and that's why we're just excited that more people are entering the industry and more interesting people are going to be our teammates.
I would like to say just go for it if you have the idea, and always just find the solution how to achieve your idea, and for the rest, let the time and your work to solve the issue. Yeah.
I want to reiterate what Reuben just said, because I love it. I'm going to go write this on my wall. You deserve to be here. That's my advice. Remind yourself of that every day, because you do, and we need your ideas. We need your diversity of perspective, and you make the industry better. You make the games that we make better, and that means better games that we all get to play. You deserve to be here.
That's a great way to end everything. All right. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, so it's 1 o'clock right on the dot. So we'll pass it over to our next event, showing off some more games from our members.